When you think of inequality, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's a question which almost always comes back to this. A little bit of money, but what if there was another layer? One that explains why we feel certain ways in different social situations. It's something sociologist Dr. Stephen Threadgold is here to mull over with you this morning. Good morning.
Hi, Kia.
What is this other layer of inequality that we may not even know exists?
Yeah, well, as you just said, like we tend to think about inequality relating to money or how much stuff you have and things like that. And sometimes in popular opinion, it spreads out to like education levels and that kind of thing. But the research I've been doing for a long time now starts to think about how those kind of money and educational things actually mean that people tend to have different emotional states when they're in specific social situations, and how that becomes a form of inequality itself, and in a way buttresses those kind of more structural things like not having much money or not having a high education. And our emotions, it's a kind of the way we relate to things. We're all born into the world, we're socialised, we have different backgrounds, and therefore we think some things are normal and some things are strange, or some things are cool and some things are uncool, or some things are tasteful or some things are vulgar. And these kind of way that we start to think about that kind of stuff, those values and tastes, affect the way that we think and feel and sense the world.
Are we aware of this?
Well, we're definitely aware of it when we're in situations when that kind of sensing makes us feel uncomfortable or disgust or anxious or stressed. So, so the research in this kind of area points out that people from relatively privileged backgrounds can feel more comfortable in, spaces that's important to feel comfortable in society, such as institutions and sport, whereas people from less privileged background tend to feel more discomfort in those areas. So, but I suppose a way to illustrate this is, if you go overseas and you feel that kind of culture shock, that's a kind of good kind of obvious indication of, you're a fish out of water in that situation. And when you're a fish in water, you tend to kind of be able to do things a lot better and correctly and smoothly and things like that.
Although it can be a bit of a shock to start with. It can wind you a little bit and you're not quite sure how to approach it.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So I think a way to think about it is like in terms of, emotional responses, is that the way that we kind of categorise each other in the world. And we do that through our tastes, through things like, you see someone in terms of what they're wearing, or you have a chat to them and you learn a bit about them. And then you tend to make judgments about those people through those things, and then you have a kind of an emotional response to them as well. So, do you have a favourite song?
I have a favourite band. It's a little bit of this. A little bit of Paramore.
Oh, yeah.
What does that tell you about me, Stephen?
Well, it tells you, all it tells me about you is kind of my own kind of relationship to that, right?
Uh-huh.
So I don't know too much about that band. I kind of associate, I'm probably a bit older than you. I associate them with them kind of, teenage emo stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And so by doing all that kind of judgment about the band, I'm kind of, in passing in a way, putting you in that category, right?
Mm.
And so that will affect the way that I kind of then think about you, or, talk to you, or what question I might ask you next or whatever. So that's an emotional response, even though it's a kind of knowledge towards that song. I then now have a kind of social, emotional relationship to you based on the judgment of whether I think that band's stupid or not.
And if I said to you, hey, Steve, I'd really love you to come and watch my favourite band playing at the Cambridge or the Stag and Hunter, would you automatically have a picture of what that room might look like?
Yes, that's right. So I definitely would, because I've been to those places lots. But like if it was, but maybe if you said something like, I don't know, King Street Hotel or something like that, it's not to my taste, I'd be more likely to go, oh, I don't know about that. So we do this all the time. I think reality TV is a good one to think about it with. People tend to either love or hate reality TV, or at least pretend that they hate it. And,
I'm feeling attacked this morning.
Yeah, that's right. So if I was to ask you what's your favourite TV show and you said something like The Bachelor, I'd probably kind of judge you in all kind of ways.
You'd eye roll at me.
There's a whole bunch of class and status stuff going on when we do that, right? And so if you can extend that kind of logic out, thinking about then how social systems work, something like the education system, really tends to favour, kids from middle-class backgrounds or kids with professional parents that have got lots of education. So when those kids come into those spaces, they tend to have an advantage, right, because it's normal for them. Kids from disadvantaged backgrounds tend to have to learn another person's culture, right? So they're kind of behind the 8 ball straight away. They have this kind of discomfort, emotional relationship. Teachers tend to treat them a little bit differently because teachers tend to be middle class, right? So there's all these kind of little everyday emotional things that happen in those spaces that are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies in a way of how inequality works.
I can see some positives in it in terms of our social connections and emotions, finding our people and finding, having that. If I had said to you, my favourite band's Paramore and yours was the same, instantly, we've got that connection, right? And we can immediately have a conversation for hours and hours, even if everything else in our life is completely different. But what can some of the inequality, the negatives be in this situation when we have those emotional responses?
Yeah, well, a good example is some research I've been doing with the Matthew Bunn and P. Jane Burke is around disadvantage in higher education. So, we're kind of socialised from an early age. We live in a meritocracy, that if you're smart and you do all the right things and make the right choices, you'll do well. And again, this tends to reflect, the middle class kind of position that kind of have certain privileges. What we're finding is kids from more disadvantaged backgrounds can be really, really dedicated to university study, for instance. But if there's kind of more material or family things that make that hard, they can be the most dedicated students in the world and they're still really going to struggle and have some disadvantage. So, if they have to look after sick parents, it's much more difficult to be able to juggle work and education. And what tends to happen is the education gets put down the kind of level of priorities. So you can see the emotional things there, that someone obviously might care about their sick dad. So what they do, they self-sacrifice and look after their sick dad, but that means that they don't do as well at university. So there's the kind of deep emotional connection with the family, and they make it what I would think is a quite rational and human decision to look after their parents or whatever. But from a kind of more social point of view, they fail at university then because they're not dedicated or whatever. But really, there's a whole bunch of other things going on there that makes university study really difficult.
As we become more aware of these in our lives, and I'm sure that everyone listening today will now have damn you Steve moments where they're going about their life and they're like, oh no, I just made an emotional judgment about that person or that situation. As we acknowledge that, what does it mean that we can do to be aware of that, and I guess be better people in a community being aware of that as well?
Yeah, I think trying to have an empathetic understandings of other people is really important, and particularly when we're kind of thinking about people that have that are disadvantaged or marginalised or have social problems that we tend to blame on the individual. So I think that's one thing that'd be really good if there was more kind of knowledge of that in society, is that quite often people who are unemployed or not doing well at school or university or whatever, we tend to have kind of quite individual reasons or individual blame for what are more kind of widespread social problems, I think. So, I would hope that research that I'm doing and many others are doing can kind of contribute to, a more empathetic understanding of, everyone's kind of day-to-day struggles.
More empathy is something that we can all use a little bit in our life, Steve. Always great to catch up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Dr. Stephen Threadgold there. He's a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Newcastle, taking you through that emotional inequality that you just may never have known you even had.